People who took revenge on their bully. What happened? Story 1. I hate the term bully in this context, but a former man-child neighbor had issues understanding that it wasn't okay to throw his garbage in my yard or let his drunk friends piss in my house. When the county cops didn't do anything about numerous calls, I started bagging the garbage and throwing it on his porch. He escalated to putting rat poison in hot dogs and throwing them to my German Shepherd mix. I saw her convulsing and found 3 packages worth of hot dogs studded with pellets right along the fence. She pulled through, no worse for wear. Cops said I couldn't prove who did it. So the next time he threw garbage in my yard, which usually contained the guts/waste from his hunting and fishing, I gathered fish guts into a bag, waited until he left, and put them in the rafters of his porch, under the hedges in his yard, and finally inside his air conditioner unit. About 3 days later, he had all the doors and windows open. The following week, he was having the carpet replaced throughout the house. Eventually, the guts rotted away and the smell faded, but I think he knew I did it because I never found trash in my yard again. Do not f with my dogs. Story 2. I grew up in a small town where we had one girl everyone thought was the prettiest girl in the whole wide world. She was a mean, petty bitch. For example, when my cat lost her life when I was in 5th grade, she sat behind me muttering about how funny it was that my cat passed away, that it was a stupid animal, and that happened because my mom was too poor to take it to the vet, and urging me to cry. Are you gonna cry about it like a big baby? Does a big baby cry over your stupid cat? Everyone's gonna see you cry! You're about to cry, aren't you? And so on. This wasn't even the meanest thing she did, and she was mean to everyone. One day in 6th grade, I'd had enough. She didn't even do anything truly awful. I was just like, Jennifer G, and decided to do something about her. So I stole one of my mom's little index/recipe cards and meticulously wrote, "I stuff my bra" in big, bold letters. I stuffed that and a little gold safety pin in my jacket pocket. The next day, I carefully affixed this to the back of her pink members-only jacket just before the first bell rang. She walked around with this damn note all day, confused as to why people were laughing at her. She screamed and screamed when she found it, and also cried. Story 3. Not really a bully so much, but I was working at my university in the Division of Student Life as a GA, and had worked myself into a great position where people trusted me and relied on my advice. One night at a big party at a local university bar, I had a craving for a cigarette. I asked this group of girls if they had one, and being one to not bum straight up, I offered a coupon I had for free McDonald's fries if someone would give me one. One of the cuter girls there with a pink stripe in her hair said yes, pulled out her cigs, and I gave her the coupon. She then put her cigs back in her pocket and told me to f off after stealing my fry coupon. I was pissed off at this point and tried reasoning with her. Seriously, over one cigarette? She then called over a couple of guy friends and said that I was falsely accusing her of stealing from me, and her friends all backed her up. She looked me in the eyes and said, "You shouldn't be so trusting." Fast forward to Monday, we had job interviews for the division, and I happened to be passing through replacing a computer. I also happened to see the same pink stripe in hair individual that had stolen the McDonald's coupon from me the week before in line. I went to the person conducting the interviews and told him that she was a thief and a liar. On my way out, I smiled and waved, but she didn't recognize me. Eventually, she didn't get the job, and the interviewer thanked me for my contribution to the interview process. Reply 1. I had a similar situation once before, but it wasn't as sweet for me. I lived with my older sister, who constantly had friends over. One night after work, I came home and saw 2 of her new friends outside my house. They were looking into an open backpack. I thought nothing of it, even though they bolted when they saw me. I got inside, my sister was passed out, and my Wii was gone, this being 2 months after release. Went to the cops and told them who it was, and they basically told me that my Wii has already likely been sold for drugs. The revenge, if you could call it that, came about a year later. The same guy came into my work for an interview. When he left, I told my boss who he was, and he never got the job. I also had a chance to cockblock him at the bar a few years later. All petty revenge, but I'll take what I can get. Story 4. I was bullied heavily in middle school and wrestled in high school. At a competition, I found I had to wrestle Josh, who was one of those bullies. I knew I could pin him, auto win, so I told my coach about him, and my goal wasn't to pin him, but to hurt him as long as possible. The wrestling match starts, and I do every move I can think of that hurts. Didn't get him onto his back, just kept trying to, and jacking up his arms and shoulders. took a couple of shots, and checked his crotch with my shoulder since he wasn't wearing a cup. I did the full 6 minutes and won 12-1 on points, which led him to cry. The entire team went ballistic, and the coach had told them he used to bully me, and they were cheering me on so hard, I felt like the king of the world. I walked off to my team, and he limped off to the athletic trainer. The fact that you managed to pull off a spectacular win without actually pinning him, all while giving him a taste of his own medicine, is pretty legendary. And having your whole team cheering you on? Well, that must have felt amazing. I bet Josh will think twice before messing with you again. Story 5. I was in 4th grade and had been bullied by a kid named Rocky. Swear to God, that was his name, who was in the 6th grade. Anyway, he would trip me, knock books out of my hand, punch me, etc. One day, out on the playground, he pushed me into the merry-go-round while it was spinning. I rolled around inside it while people were trying to stop it. The whole time, he's laughing at me. At one moment, I get pulled out and I'm scraped up pretty good, get taken to the office to get patched up. The teachers asked what happened, but I told them I fell. Went back outside and saw him standing there with his buddies. I ran as fast as I could toward him and punched him as hard as I could in the face. Broke his nose, and just stood there looking at him, ready to fight. His buddies told him to leave me alone, and I never got picked on again at school. Story 6. My buddy and I pulled a prank on a bully, Adam, during the last 2 weeks of high school. We were hanging out at home, playing video games, and Adam surprised us by stopping by, under the guise of wanting to be friends, despite having picked on us for the better part of 4 years, and one time stabbing me with a pencil. Within about 5 minutes, he was pressuring me to write his final assignment for him, a speech for debate class. At first, I said no. I mean, what is this, some comic book cliche? What'll he demand next, my milk money too? But my buddy kept winking at me, putting pressure on me, and convinced me that we should do it. After some negotiation, we agreed to put together a speech for him, but only if Adam would pay us $25 and also pick up a rather elaborate dinner order from Wendy's for us to eat that night. He agreed. My buddy and I ate well that night, and we had a plan. What we actually gave Adam was a quickly and pretty poorly written, and somewhat incendiary, speech about the silliness of Martin Luther King Day, and how, if America really wanted to celebrate a true hero, it would instead be Joe Namath Day. I'm serious, that's what we wrote. We honestly believed Adam would read this at home, realize he'd been had, and be forced to rewrite and memorize a new speech in the wee hours of the night. Except, it didn't go down that way. Imagine my surprise when Adam actually delivered that very speech in class the next day. He didn't have the memorization down, he kept referencing his papers, but he marched on, and the look on our teacher's face was just priceless. I think I peed my pants, I was giggling so hard. The other kids in the classroom were in shock. As I recall, the teacher made Adam stop his presentation. She told him to leave the classroom, and she yelled at him in the hallway. As far as I know, Adam never fessed up that he hadn't actually written that paper, and I'm still not quite sure he ever really figured out just how brilliantly he'd been played. Reply 1. I did something similar, but not as intense as your story, when I was in high school. A kid sitting next to me when we were doing a history test was blatantly copying my work, as in waiting for me to start writing, staring at me as I write said answers, then writing the same answers word for word. It was a short test and I had enough time, so I went through and wrote all the wrong answers to each question. Things like adding Japan invades Germany and the United States during World War II, leading them to victory. And Adolf Hitler escaped to Antarctica at the end of the war and still lives there to this day. Things that were so clearly fake that I was in shock while I watched him copy down my answers. When I got to the last question, he copied down the last answer and then went and turned it in. I then erased all of my test and redid it with the right answers. So worth it when we got the papers back, since he didn't say anything to me about his F and my A, since he'd have to admit he was copying my answers. Ha 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 ha! Story 7. In my secondary school, when you were about to leave, you'd wear your school uniform shirt on the last day, and people would sign it for you. There was also an option to wear your own clothes for the last few days. So this guy who was leaving came decked out in the best of 1980s sports fashion, wielding a permanent marker, and instead of signing the shirts of leavers, he went around scribbling on the shirts of younger kids. Now bear in mind we were pretty poor, and if I came home with my uniform in a mess, I'd get grief because we couldn't afford to replace it. He grabbed me and scribbled all over my shirt, and somehow, using as yet unknown Quicksilver powers, I grabbed the marker off him and managed to scribble not only all over his Sergio douchebag windbreaker, but all over his face and neck. He punched me in the am a girl, but it was worth it. Oh man, it sounds like Mr. 1980s sports fashion really met his match that day. That's some serious karma in action when you not only managed to return the favor on his precious windbreaker, but also gave him a surprise facial makeover. Story 8. When I was about 7 years old, there was a girl on the bus who would pull my hair and pick on me, which caused me to come home crying. My parents asked the driver to move our assigned seating, but they refused. My dad asked me how I could fix the problem. I responded, "How can I do anything if I'm not allowed to hit?" as was the rule. He answered that I am not allowed to hit, but I can't get hit. He also explained what I should do, and I did it. So when the girl sat next to me, I should put my back against the wall, my feet on her thigh, and slide her off the seat. She fell and cried. I got in trouble and the assigned seating was moved, but the problem was solved. Story 9. Not me, but a good friend of mine. Sophomores in high school. Eric kept a Gatorade in the side pocket of his book bag for lunch every day. Just before the second period would start, Eric would put his bag down in class and go to the bathroom. When he would come back, his Gatorade was always empty. This went on for about 2 weeks, and no one would ever tell him who it was. When finally one day he came back from the bathroom to another kid running out of the room, watching and holding his pants. Apparently, Eric had had enough of his Gatorade being taken and had put a few drops, half a bottle, of Visine in the Gatorade before he came to school. The kid had to be admitted to the hospital a few days later for dehydration from so much throwing up/diarrhea from the Visine. Eric finally knew who it was, and no one drank his Gatorade anymore. Story 10. There was a kid named Matt in my school who, in 8th grade, had developed a rating system for the girls based on the size of their breasts and kept getting away with saying gross things to them. He had been reported to the guidance counselor and faculty repeatedly, but they kept saying, "We can't do anything about it if we don't personally see it happening." Which is like, do you think he's stupid enough to do it in front of you? He also kept calling me Mimi after the Drew Carey Show character. I was getting sick of it after a few months and fruitlessly talking to the guidance counselor about that as well. I finally realized that none of the adults were going to do anything about it, and one day at lunch, he called me Mimi, and I turned around and told him, "If you call me that again, you're not gonna like my reaction. I don't know what I'm gonna do, but you're not gonna like it." Which was true. I just figured I'd react in the moment. 30 minutes later, he called me Mimi in the hallway, and I turned around and gave him a big, open palm roundhouse slap across his face. He was completely taken aback. All I had to say was, "I told you you weren't gonna like it." I got suspended for a week, and my parents were furious at me. However, Matt never harassed anyone again, and he was totally polite from that day forward. I don't generally advocate violence, but I still feel like it was a proportional response to months and months of gross behavior on his part, especially in the absence of adults who were willing to hold him accountable. I told the administration and my parents as much when I received my suspension. Story 11. I had a friend who had a bully. He had a locker above my friend and would intentionally drop books on her head, push her around, insult her throughout the year, and we all had a class together where he was generally a dick to anyone that he could. Before class started and anyone else was in class yet, the teacher had to step out for a bit, and it was just us 3 in the room. My friend was, and still is, very tiny, but that day, it didn't matter. She snapped and had enough of his and went on the attack. I don't think she could have done much damage on her own, but I stepped in. Puberty was swift for me, and I was one of the largest kids in school. By 5th grade, I was already the size of an adult woman. I pinned him to the wall and let my friend kick the shit out of him and punch him in the balls. He didn't speak to either of us after that, and we never got into any trouble. I don't think he wanted to tell anyone that he got beat up by a couple of girls. Story 12. I used to get bullied for my lunch money in middle school by 2 guys for a year, one of which used to be my friend in elementary school. They would slap me across the face from behind, push me against lockers, and spear me. This was when Goldberg was popular in WCW. It got worse because this girl who I am still friends with would stick up for me. What made it worse was because of the fact that she was a girl sticking up for a boy, which in their words made me a bitch. Well, as time progressed, I started growing pretty rapidly in height, towering over them, while the 2 guys were pretty much the same height or only grew a couple of inches. They stopped picking on me physically, obviously, but verbally kept at it. I guess I just snapped because they were picking on one of my other friends for lunch money, and I kneed the guy in the solar plexus and just rammed the other guy's head into a water fountain as hard as I could. The feeling I got after doing that made me so violently hyped and surprised at how light they were. All 3 of us got ISS for a week. They avoided my presence ever since that incident. I did have to watch my back though, because their friends threatened to jump me. Nothing came of it, just a bunch of scared, loud hyenas with hurt egos. Sounds like the tables truly turned when you decided to stand up for your friend and teach those guys a lesson they'd never forget. It's interesting how the smallest change can shift the balance of power so dramatically. Those bullies went from being schoolyard terrors to avoiding you like the plague. I guess they learned that sometimes karma comes in the form of a tall, hyped-up friend with a strong sense of justice. Story 13. There was a boy who picked on pretty much every girl in his grade when we were in grade 7. He and his friends started getting fairly and started grabbing girls' butts and crotches in the hallway between classes. No one ever stood up to him because he was a very tall and cool, athletic, popular kid, and pretty much everyone was intimidated by him. I played trumpet in band class, and I was the only girl who did, in a big group of boys, including him. So he picked on me a lot. They called me Butch Girl and simply because I played trumpet instead of flute or clarinet. I wasn't even a tomboy. I was a pretty feminine girl, so he was really reaching. One day he came up behind me in the hallway after school was out, and of course he grabbed me sort of under my butt, almost to the front of my crotch, so hard that it really hurt. Luckily, I was carrying my trumpet case, so I spun around and smashed him in the balls with it. He crumpled down to the ground with tears in his eyes and never bothered me again after that day. Sometimes I feel a little bit bad though, because I wonder if I may have caused him permanent damage.
For more stories, please subscribe and don't forget to hit the notification bell. Thanks.